Hey, let's talk today about periods of the lifespan. Hope you've been reading. You need to, so that you know what we're talking about in these videos. I'll try to keep this as short as I can. Um, Periods of the lifespan. Good place to start. Well, there's a disagreement, and let me call it something different. There's a debate about how much of this is nature and how much of this is nurture. And we've talked about that already. And your book has mentioned it, I think, not maybe not as intently or as intensely rather as I like it to be, but nonetheless it's there. So let's talk about this business of natural or learned or whatever it is. And let's begin with a consideration called social construction. Um, the idea with social construction is that development appears to be a natural thing, but really there is a lot of cultural and societal influence. If you don't believe me, compare your upbringing to those in, let's pick Paraguay or Paraguay. Sorry if I mispronounce it, or Peru, or Siberia in Russia. There is an influence of culture. There's an influence of society. There's even an influence of environment. So what that leads to is a developmental process pretty much controlled by your environment. And we look at these identities, these eras, if you want to call that, these periods, with the idea in mind that culture and society are involved in this. Childhood, adolescence, and adulthood. Those things are determined by your culture and your society. I'm not talking about physical growth. I'm not talking about physical stuff here. I'm talking about cognitive and emotional stuff. This is a Jean Piaget thing. So let me give you an example. It's easy to understand. Remember, culture and society. So, and let's use America as our example, since that's where I am and I have a lot of experience being an American. In the 1920s, until the 1920s, prior to the 1920s, adolescence was not considered a developmental determinant. In other words, it wasn't even considered. It was there. Everybody knew what a teenager was, but it wasn't so pronounced. And the reason was because of the educational system. Believe it or not, of all things. Not puberty, not, oh, look at your 14-year-old. I remember when he was knee-high to a grasshopper. We view adolescence now as a major developmental period. Well, where did it come from? Well, it's very simple. In the 1920s, the school systems changed. The groupings changed. Prior to the 20s, you started school in the first grade in the same building as people who were 17 and were graduating. So everybody's together. Wasn't really any separation per se, not official, in terms of age. Yes, the schooling advanced. I mean, you didn't take the same courses in, quote, higher grades as you did when you were first and second grade. You were learning to do reading, writing, blah, blah, blah. And then now you're up into more analytical thinking in the later periods of school. But here's what happened. The educational system developed high schools. Now, what age were you when you went to high school? Well, It varied. It became 10th through 12th grade. And don't ask me a date, I can't give you one. But that was the traditional. No, let me back up. The traditional for high school, 9 through 12th grade. And then somewhere along the line, they dropped ninth grade back down to what was called junior high. So first grade was rather elementary school was first grade through sixth grade, and then seventh, eighth, and ninth were junior high, and then 10th, 11th, and 12th were high school. But it wasn't always that way. 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th was high school, mostly in the beginning. So what's the point? The point is that's a separation time. High school gave rise to the recognition of something that was already there, and we call it adolescence, teen years. And why is that a big deal? Well, it's a developmental period because society and culture demands are different for age groups that we call teenage groups, adolescent groups. Prior to that, when you went to school, and some schools didn't even have, quote, high school per se. You may go for 4, 5, 6 years, or whatever the case was, 8 years, whatever, and then you left school and got a job. So you were considered a child in school, no matter what the age range was, until you got out of school and got a job. Now, I'm not going to get into the high school history and all the history about American education, and it varies from country to country. But the main point is this adolescence period, an example of the influence of culture in society. Right? You with me? Okay. So you have to understand then that there are reasons that we have these divisions, and these are pretty consistent across the world. The names may be different, the conduct may be different, but conduct in the way you treat somebody in a particular age range. But by and large, there's this idea, culturally and society based, that if you're in this little age range here, you're considered this, and then you advance to this, and you advance to that, and you advance to the other. So to simplify it, I'm going to give you 8 periods of development, and these 8 periods of development are Western based. But they're not so much different than other cultures, dependent upon whether it's industrialized or whether it's agrarian, etc. Is this in the out country, back country of Africa? Could you compare Western to that? And the answer is no. But can I compare this in America, this Western thing, to England, for instance, or Brazil? Yeah, you probably compare it very well. So we have these 8 periods, and let's run through these quickly. We begin in infancy, obviously. Infancy. Are there influences there? Absolutely. There are people they're trying to teach you informally how to do things, such as talk, eat. Pick one. Advance from infancy to toddlerhood. Now we're running around the house. Little children cannot walk. Once they become bipedal, immediately they want to run everywhere. I'm sure you remember that. If you have brothers and sisters, you've witnessed it. You leave toddlerhood to early childhood. Now you start school. You may have started kindergarten, pre-kindergarten even. I don't know, one day they'll have pre something. So enter into the era of early childhood. And this is a lot of this advancement is based on where you are in school. Toddlerhood, infancy, toddlerhood, early childhood, obviously elementary school, middle childhood, what we call middle school now, adolescence, now you're into high school. Graduate high school, and we begin to call you young adult, young adulthood, middle adulthood, and then late adulthood. There are age ranges that are associated with this. Let's use the teen years, for example. Adolescence, traditionally thought to be 13 to 19. Pre-adolescent, 12, 11 and a half, somewhere in there. There's some wild figures that have been presented related to age ranges, but let's use 19 for the moment as a stepping stone from 19 to 20. Hit 20, ooh, biggie, young adulthood, right? You're out of high school, probably in college, maybe in college, military, or you've gone out and gotten a job that doesn't require a lot of sophisticated training in terms of school stuff. Middle adulthood, now you're in your 30s, 40s, and then late adulthood, now you're old. You're getting there. You notice that the 8 of these, none of it says old people for whatever reasons, I don't know. So, adolescence. Let me just throw this tidbit out at you. There was a study or some sort of an idea not too many years back where they wanted to revisit these age ranges. So adolescence became 13 through, get this, 13 through 29, and then young adulthood, 30 through 45, very strange, and so on and so forth. We don't really, that's not real acceptable. Maybe emotionally in terms of maturity, and that's most likely where that study concentrated its efforts. So, but we'll stick with the traditions. So you get to be 65, then we say, you're getting old, that's late adulthood, just as an example. So those are the 8 developmental periods from a Western standpoint. And I could give you the accepted age ranges: infancy to toddlerhood, birth to 3. I just ran over some of these. Middle childhood, 6 to 11. I'm just jumping around. But that's just a westernized view, but it's not so much off from other industrialized nations. So the age is a factor, I guess, probably is the point that's to be made. How do we view you? What are the expectations of your culture and society when you become an adolescent? You've left late childhood, now you're an adolescent. You're expected to be more mature, right? So that's the kind of stuff we're thinking about. In terms of some influences on development, they're very individual. Their characteristics and their influences. And I give you some physical stuff and a little mental stuff. Here are examples: individual differences: gender, height, weight, body build, health, energy level, kind of odd, right? Intelligence, understandable. Temperament not as in anger, blah, blah, blah. Temperament as in easy, feisty, slow to warm up. And then there's a mixture. Personality, recognizable by the time you're about 5 years old, and then pretty much ensconced by the time you're 13. And then emotional reactions, which would be your related to your temperament. How do you react emotionally to different things? And then we have some things we call context differences. Your home, what goes on there, the community you live in, societies, relationships, schools that you attend, or no school association. Free time. If you live in an agrarian situation, if you live in the outback of some lesser developed country, you probably don't have a lot of free time because you're busy surviving, for example. And then we have to consider heredity, inborn traits, or characteristics inherited from your biological parents. This gets to be muddy when you get into adoption. Very different set of circumstances. And then the environment that you find yourself in, the outer and the inner. The world outside, the world outside of the womb. And then learning that comes from experience. This is the nature-nurture question. So all of these are influences to consider. And then now we delve into a kind of more sophisticated view of this. So this developmental stuff that we've talked about already is affected by maturation. Maturation is a natural sequence of physical and behavioral changes. Learning to talk, learning to walk, things like that. And we can look at these from the standpoint of averages, but those can be different based on individual maturation. Some children, I think Einstein didn't speak till he was 4, for example. Most children are saying things at 2. So what plays a role in that? Environmental and heredity. These two things interact and have an influence on your maturation, but don't override the nature part of it. So you're physically and cognitively able to do something on an individual basis within the realm of average. And then we look at how do influences affect development. A lot of ways. I want to wrap this up because we'll get into that later. I don't want to leave that laying on the table, or actually I do. We'll get into that business of how do influences affect development in another discussion. I'll give you a hint. There's a lot of influence from the standpoint of the parents. And finally, contexts of development. The nuclear family. What's common, used to be anyway, 2-generational kinship, right? Nuclear family includes that, economic standing, household unit, usually in the past 2 parents, not so much now, 1 and maybe even a step parent, parents with bringing into a different marriage biological children from a previous marriage, adopted children, stepchildren, a lot of things to consider in the nuclear family. Then we have the extended family. It's a multi-generational network of grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, and more distant relatives. More pronounced in some societies than others. American culture doesn't really treat elderly people with the same respect that, say, an Hispanic culture would. So there's some differences there. And then socioeconomic status. And what neighborhood do you live in? Income level, educational, occupational level of adults in the household. Influential things that play a role cognitively, emotionally, and may even have an influence on you physically. If you are a low income level, maybe you don't eat good foods because you can't afford to buy them. So I hope all that makes sense. Okay, so there you are. Influences on development. Very good. I'll see you again soon.